Okay, let's get started. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Seattle MLK Organizing Coalition's 39th Annual MLK Celebration. Each year, we honor Dr. King's legacy with a rally, march, and community workshops, amplifying our call for peace and economic and social justice. This year, we also honor the legacy of Congressman John Lewis and his call for good trouble, necessary trouble. Our workshop for this hour is 14 Demands for Washington with the Poor People's Campaign. My name is Katie Harris from the MLK Workshop Committee. I'm a white woman with curly gray hair. I'm wearing a black top and a colorful jacket made with Guatemalan fabric. I'm sitting in my home office with ethnic art on white walls. Together with Krista Irwin, we'll be your moderators for this workshop. In just a minute, I'll introduce you to our presenters, Reverend Bianca Davis Lovelace and Christina Brennan. First, let me explain our format. We'll be using Zoom's webinar feature. You'll be able to submit questions to our moderators at any time during the presentation using the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Only the moderators and presenters will see your questions. After Bianca's and Christina's presentation, we'll switch to Q&A. We are committed to making our workshops and rally speeches accessible. There's captioning for this workshop. You can access it by going to the bottom of your Zoom screen and clicking on the CC Live Transcribe button. You should see the captions in the body of the Zoom platform. If you want to see the full transcript, you can go to full transcript. At the conclusion of the workshop, we'll ask you to fill out a brief evaluation. These evaluations are very important to us because they help us understand who attends and how to plan for future workshops. Now I'm going to introduce you to our presenters. Reverend Bianca Davis Lovelace is a United Church of Christ minister, and she's chair and executive director of the Renton Ecumenical Association of Churches and chair of the Washington State Poor People's Campaign. Christina Brennan is a communications consultant, presentation coach, and the Poor People's Campaign organizer. So now, welcome over to you, Bianca and Christina.
Thank you. I won't add too much more to my introduction so we can get into the workshop, but I've been with the campaign for, I guess, 2.5 years now, going on 3 years since we launched in 2018 here in Washington State with 40 days of mass action. And usually we give a lot more background in that, but I also began just my general organizing work here in Seattle and with the mentorship of Bianca, who's on the call today. So I really, my heart's here in Seattle for sure. And I actually went to my first MLK Day workshop 4 years ago. And I was connecting a lesson that I learned that day to our theme today in honoring John Lewis. And I noticed that there's been a lot of images of the brutality that he faced. And what I actually learned in that workshop is that, especially as white people, we don't need to be sharing out those images of Black trauma and things like that. So that's a lesson that I learned here at this workshop. And that's just a point of how important that is, that I was able to change that behavior. Wish I would have learned that lesson sooner and not shared so many videos prior to that, but lesson learned. So that's something I learned here. Good necessary trouble, love the theme. And I'm just happy to be here organizing. And I hope that, we'll get to meet you all in a different format someday.
And I'm Reverend Bianca Davis Lovelace. I have been with the campaign since its very beginning in 2017, November of 2017, and we officially launched in the spring of 2018 as well. So yeah, just enjoy the work, enjoy activism. I've been a part of the Black Lives Matter movement in the Chicago, Northwest Indiana area before I moved here to Seattle, and have been involved in movement work and activism for God knows how long, and since I began seminary. So this is what I enjoy doing, and I'm just really passionate about Black Lives Matter and the Poor People's Campaign. Those are two movements I'm very passionate about.
And we, as a campaign, are passionate about the Black Lives Matter, or the movement for Black Lives, right? It's prouder than Black Lives Matter. We're going to dive into this presentation. Our goal for today is to present to you what the National Poor People's Campaign has presented as 14 policy priorities to the new administration. Specifically, they need to address them in the first 100 days. You know, that's like a big marker for the presidential branch, right? But we want to figure out how, as a state campaign, this model of there's a national poor people's campaign and there's a Washington state and 40 other states have their own campaign. And we're working on also regions having their own chapters where they're autonomous as well. How can we kind of take this framework that's been put forth by nationals and make it specific to Washington, making demands to Governor Inslee and our other legislators, or our legislators? So today we're going to be presenting, but we're also going to invite you on MLK Day, if available, to join us for a community conversation where we can get into small groups and actually talk a little bit more. This is very one way today, although we will have a couple of polls, and you can of course drop questions into the question box for the end, but we probably won't get to them all. So we hope you can come to the follow-up event. If not, we also do monthly open house calls. So those are on Zoom as well. So there's ways to get connected with us and get your input into us. I'll also be dropping a link to a form that you can fill out if you want to go more in depth about your feedback. Okay, let me go ahead and share my screen. Share the top of your screen. Okay. 14 policy priorities, and how can we turn these into demands for Washington? So as you hear the things that Bianca and I are going to present, think about how that could be, first of all, how is it impacting your community, your family, your friends? And then how can we turn that into a demand for our legislators or executive orders from Governor Inslee? Normally we'd go into some depth. The Poor People's Campaign, we're really about history, right? We're honoring history right now. That's what this whole workshop series is about as well. So we would normally go a little bit deeper into the campaign, its inception originally in 1967. On the screen here, we do have a quote that I'm gonna move this bar so I can read, from Dr. King when he gave the speech, The Three Evils of Society, and that's what the campaign was built off of. He said, "The fact is that capitalism was built on the exploitation and suffering of Black slaves and continued to thrive on the exploitation of the poor, both Black and white, both here and abroad. If Black people and poor whites do not participate in the free flow of wealth within our economy, they will forever be poor, giving their energies, their talents, and their limited funds to the consumer market, but reaping few benefits in return. The way to end poverty is to end the exploitation of the poor." And in the campaign, those three evils that were named were systemic racism, 1, racism, 2, poverty, 3, the war economy. So he's really tying that whole economic picture together in that speech. So when people ask, is it class or race? The answer is yes, it's both. But we do put race first because of the history of how this country was built. So we go in deeper in other workshops on the history, but know that this is a historical campaign. The work never really stopped. The different organizations were dismantled and such, but these people have still been working. There's people who worked on the original campaign working on today's campaign. So we're very rooted in our history, but also adopting new tactics and expanding those three evils to name ecological devastation, as well as distorted moral narratives. So that's things like your bootstrap myth, that if you just worked a little bit harder, you wouldn't be poor. That's also the ways in which some people take religious text and try to shame LGBTQIA folks. We don't do any of that. We're shifting the narrative, we're building power, and we're affecting policy and elections. And then Bianca, did you want to add anything before we dive into the?
No, just waiting for the meat and potatoes.
I feel like the intro so many times that I didn't want to sound robotic, so I hope. All right. The next slide, Christina. Okay. Again, these were presented nationally. There's recordings if you want to hear that. We've gotten support from one of our local politicians, Pramila Jayapal, She's committed to helping draft legislation that's in line with these demands. So we shall see. But this is just a reiteration of what Dr. King already said. So with these demands, looking at typical organizing, right? You got to meet material needs first, immediately. So the first priority is centered around COVID relief. So number one is to enact comprehensive, free, and just COVID-19 relief. And then I'm gonna pass this to Bianca for a moment so I can take a sip of water.
Alrighty. So this relief must prioritize the needs of essential workers, especially people of color and poor folks who have been hit hardest in this pandemic, including mandate the collection, monitoring, and reporting of the impact of the pandemic by race, ethnicity, income, occupation, geography, and in high-risk congregate settings. Equitable and free COVID-19 testing, treatment, and quality care, including mental health and safely tested vaccines, regardless of income, age, ability, documentation status.
Sorry,
Yeah, I'm looking at the other notes too. And frontline workers, as well as health workers, the elderly and most vulnerable. A targeted plan to guarantee access and education around the safety, efficacy, and of especially for poor and low income communities. A guaranteed and adequate income, including rapid and direct payment to all low wage temporary workers for the duration of the crisis. A national, and I'll repeat this, a national rent freeze and mortgage moratorium, as well as a national moratorium on utilities shutoffs without credit penalties. Increase the impact of food and economic security programs like SNAP, WIC, CTC, EITC by raising the minimum allocations and expanding eligibility. Resources to keep all rural hospitals and community health centers open with the infusion of resources to Indian health services. Permanent protection for Social Security, SSI, SSDI, Medicare, and Medicaid. Emergency OSHA standards for health workers, first responders, and anyone else in frontline positions. Protection for people in mental health facilities, prisons, detention centers, juvenile detention centers, and other congregate settings. Suspension of all CBP and ICE enforcement, and ensuring all emergency provisions are made available to immigrants, including undocumented people. Increase support for public schools to provide continuous, equitable, and quality remote learning access for the duration of any school closures, including for children and with disabilities, and schools to continue to provide social services for qualifying children and families. Student debt relief. Let me repeat that one more time. Student debt relief. Lord Jesus. These measures must remain in place until the economy recovers from the bottom up, and we are not sure what that says at the bottom.
COVID free. I don't know exactly.
Okay. Let me repeat one more time. Student debt relief. Lord, we definitely need that.
That's and that's one of those things that seems like it has to come from the federal level, but maybe what are some other ways that we can support that and help people pay off loans or something? I don't
Exactly.
know. But that's
exactly.
very comprehensive. I think what we want to also get specific on is the who is getting this relief and when. So we want to make sure we get specific data around who's been most impacted by COVID and that they're getting it first, right?
Especially communities of color and communities where there are pharmacy deserts, which we'll get more into on our next discussion that happens Monday. But we want to make sure that everyone has access to the vaccine if they desire to take the vaccine.
Quick question. Is this bar with the like mute and all that stuff, are you all able to see that? Is it in your way? No? Because I keep moving it around because I think it's blocking text, but maybe I'll stop doing that. Okay.
We did have one person say that some of the text was cut off,
Yeah, okay. So
but that was a previous slide, I think.
yeah, that slide. Sorry about that. I think the rest of them are like this, so we don't have to worry about that part anymore. Sorry, Bianca, thank you. Okay, so number 2 is to guarantee quality healthcare for all, regardless of any pre-existing conditions. And I just want to state this has actually been a demand since day one of the Poor People's Campaign. We have a long list of demands that we've already presented. We've even presented an actual moral budget that outlines how to pay for all of our demands to Congress. So a lot of this is reiterations, but we're saying like right now, address these right now. So again, how can we turn this to the state? How can the state or other local, you know, if y'all want to break off and make some demands for our local politicians, we can organize around that too. So specifically here, this begins with expanding Medicaid in every state, securing Medicare, working towards enacting a public universal healthcare option, and building up our public health infrastructure. It also includes fully funding and expanding. They use Indian Health Services because of the national program, but this would be any tribe locally, right? Like how can we make sure that, well, first of all, land back, let's just say that, but expanding the services that are already being provided and ensuring quality healthcare for those who are incarcerated and detained. Well, free them all, but in the meantime, healthcare.
3, raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour immediately. Increase the minimum wage immediately to $15 an hour and then annually until it reaches a true housing wage, estimated at $23 an hour in 2018. Guarantee the right to form and join unions to all workers. Right now, I believe that we only have that mandate in the city of Seattle. I'm not sure exactly if we have that in other places, like on the eastern part of the state. But right now, I know that city of Seattle has the minimum wage at $15 an hour. We would like to push that happens nationally, and no matter the state or the county, just with $15 an hour, a livable wage, and eventually get to at least $23 an hour.
Yeah, and this is actually where we have a poll that we'd like you all to answer if you're able to here on the Zoom today, is what do you think the Washington state one? So again, we're taking this national demand to Washington state, starting with 15. Those are just kind of some numbers. If you've got some more specific analysis that you want to provide, again, we'll have a form where you can add more specific feedback. And while we just give you a minute or so to answer that, I do want to just mention when we talk about all workers, don't let the clergy and faith leaders in the room fool you. We mean all workers. That means sex workers. That means anybody who is providing a service in this capitalist system who needs to be paid and compensated fairly or protected fairly. We mean all workers. So that's that. I feel like this is a pretty short, easy to answer question. So I don't know how much longer we need to spend on voting. Let's see what you guys think so far. So it looks like the majority are saying 18, but followed very closely by 22 or more than 22. So yeah, definitely curious to hear more during our open discussion. But that estimated $23 an hour in 2018 was from the Institute of Policy Study, Repairs on the Breach, and another organization that put together this whole report. And so we know the way inflation and everything works, that's probably already higher in 2021. So I would love to hear more from you all, but we'll move on. Okay. Number 4 is basically what I was just talking about, update the poverty measure. A new measure must replace the current poverty line to accurately reflect current conditions of poverty and economic insecurity. The new measure must take into account race, age, familial status, ability, geography, sexual orientation, and other identities that are marginalized, and establish a new basis for eligibility, appropriations, and allocations of resources. Everything's kind of based off of that poverty measure, and we know it's so incomparably low that like it doesn't actually provide the relief. The programs that are supposed to be relief aren't relieving anything.
5, guarantee quality housing for all. Expand public and affordable housing and rental assistance. Stop all foreclosures and evictions immediately. Enact a rent freeze, including stopping all increases in rent, and cancel rent and mortgage payments that cannot be paid. Move the burden of proof off of renters and households that are facing evictions to the financial interests that are seeking evictions. We are currently in a rent moratorium that I believe it continues until March 30th, I believe. And then after that, we don't know what would the next step be as far as with the rent freeze. There are a lot of people who are now thousands of dollars behind in rent, thousands of dollars behind in utilities. And if something is not done to relieve both situations where it comes to the housing crisis and the issues around utilities, then the utilities also piling up for many households, then this is really we're going to see a big boom and explosion in homelessness. We are already third in the county, third in the country rather, for King County is already third in the country for homelessness. And so if something is not done within the next couple of months, within the year of 2021, we are going to see an even larger population of homeless people on the streets. And so we don't want to see that, and we need to push our legislators and our politicians to do something. There needs to be some kind of relief enacted within the next couple of months.
I also want to take a quick second to shout out an activist from Kansas City. You guys might have seen her viral video when she was letting the city council know about themselves. KJX, she said luxury affordable housing. And I just think that that is beautiful and that poor people deserve luxury too. So
Amen.
that's that. Number 6 is to enact a federal jobs program to build up investments, infrastructure, public institutions, climate resilience, energy efficiency, and socially beneficial industries and jobs in poor and low-income communities. And we'd say starting with communities of color. Prioritize rural and urban areas that have been hit by deindustrialization, climate disasters, and economic crisis. Invest in socially beneficial sectors, so care economy, healthcare, long-term care, education, service sectors. Bullet 2, environmentally sustainable infrastructure jobs that expand and retrofit public and affordable housing. Public and affordable housing, water and sanitization systems, public transit, utilities, and broadband access. That's a national demand, is universal broadband or other access to internet, and sustainable food and production distribution. Expand healthcare and public health infrastructure, training and capacity, including rural hospitals and community care clinics, nursing capacity, EMT, long-term care, mental health, and substance abuse. Convert vacant properties into affordable public housing. It's so silly, like why is that not just a given? Repair and retrofit schools to be energy efficient and climate resilient, and otherwise build up teaching and school capacity. Here, I'll just take a moment to point out that the city and county built a $240 million youth jail instead of repairing and retrofitting. Like, schools like Rainier Beach High School, I think went 5 decades without any sort of repair. So just a local example, right? How can we bring those to the forefront? Next bullet is cultural training and production of art, music, and cultural work. So important, big part of the campaign. We sing and make art all the time. And the last bullet there is training and placement in ICT, RD, and automation sectors. Essentially, where's the future jobs at? And then we want to ensure this expanded infrastructure will be publicly held for the common good rather than corporate and private profit. So often we see these solutions where we think the market's going to respond and fix, and we don't agree. So with this bullet, this is about a federal jobs program. So we'd like to know in the poll, using a scale of strongly disagree to strongly agree, do you think that Washington State should create a similar jobs program? And I actually learned last night that in the 80s, there was something like this, maybe not as robust, but there was something in place. So if you know anything about that or were part of that, you experienced that and you have any input, we definitely love to hear, you know, what worked before that. We don't need to start from scratch, right? So I'll give a moment for that, for you all to answer that poll while I grab my charger. Okay, maybe like 10 more seconds or less. I don't know how many people have responded yet, but we're only halfway through.
Christina, there's a question about what is ICT?
That's what, I don't know if you heard my little sub thing. I actually don't remember. I listened to the presentation and I don't remember what that acronym stands for. So I would sum that bullet up as where are the jobs going. So we think of IT, tech stuff, research and development, automation sectors. I will have to make sure that that's included in the list that we send out. Sorry about that for not having an answer right now, but what are the sectors that are booming here in Washington? Where can we focus in, right, the investment to start? And it looks like most people strongly agree. We have some folks who strongly disagree as well. And I would love to hear why, if you have any specific reasons why you think that would not work or help achieve goals of equity. I'm always curious of what the outliers think. So if you have anything to add, please let us know, but this has been helpful so far. So thank you.
Next, something extremely important, protect and expand voting rights and civil rights. This includes a restoration of the Voting Rights Act and a pre-clearance formula that applies to formerly convicted, I think this, yeah, VRA jurisdictions. I think that's what it says, as it cuts off. As well as any states that have passed voter suppression laws since 2013. Making election day a holiday. Making election day a holiday. Ensuring the formerly and currently incarcerated the right to vote. Ensuring a comprehensive census count. Examining the need to expand the Supreme Court. Setting an aggressive plan to appoint federal judges. Appointing an attorney general with a fully staffed and committed civil rights division. Extending statehood to Washington, D.C., and police and criminal justice reform based on the demands of the grassroots organizations and communities, including this campaign, who are most egregiously impacted by police violence, mass incarceration, and abuse of police power. I will say one name, Stacey Abrams. At the end of the day, we know the importance of our voting power, We want to make sure that we continue this movement, that we continue the momentum that we're feeling right now. Georgia, I am so proud of the state of Georgia and how many folks have stepped up to the plate to vote and exercise their rights. And I'm just going to say it, shout out to Black women, because Black women held it down in many of the states that we especially in the South, but especially in Georgia and all over, Black women held it down during this election and previous elections as well. But we know the power of our vote simply just by what we just experienced the last few weeks. And so we want to definitely make sure that that's on the table nationally and locally.
Absolutely. I will do one like asterisk that we also understand that some folks have chosen not to participate in the system because of how fucked up it is. So if that's you, we don't necessarily shame you or push you away, but we definitely support voting. If you have the right to do that, please do it. And then also most of us are abolitionists. I just want to put that out there on that last very reformist sounding bullet point. So that's where we'd love input too around Washington State, how we can specify with our wants and needs. Why does it take 3 clicks to go to the next slide? Okay. Number 8, guarantee safe, quality, and equitable public education with supports for protection against re-segregation. Increase public education funding at all levels, especially for poor and low-income students and communities. This includes additional resources for public schools to provide online and remote learning to all students, social programs and services to poor families, increased support for students with disabilities and ESL programs, teacher and admin support, infrastructure and technology upgrades, and investment in arts and cultural and extracurricular programs. This also encompasses 100% student debt relief for poor and low-income borrowers, proportionately less debt relief with higher incomes, as well as federal resources to ensure that 2 to 4 year colleges, technical programs, and higher education can be free for everyone who wants to attend. So there's a lot of talks I know right now that like there's this promise of student debt relief, and then, you know, they roll it back to like $10,000 or something, whatever the current discussion is.
Yes, so irritated by that. It just should be complete wipe clean because of this current state that we're living in. We don't even have enough jobs available for folks to even, you know, make a livable wage, especially after COVID-19. COVID-19 took away so many jobs. So for them to even expect folks to even pay that off, I have my own personal opinions, which I'll share later.
I'm always curious too, like all the admin costs to figure out who deserves what amount of relief, like just pay it off.
Exactly.
One swipe, keep it moving. Okay. Let's do that.
So number 9, comprehensive and just immigration reform. In the building of the Southern Wall, demilitarize immigration, border enforcement, and repeal mandatory detention, deportation, child detention, and family separation. Establish a special task force to identify and reunite families. Let me repeat that again. Establish a special task force to identify and reunite families. Ensure regular and timely access to legal documentation and residency. Make immigration eligible for all public welfare and social programs. I don't even know where to begin when it comes to the way that this past administration, soon to be past administration, has handled immigration is simply repulsive. And I'm just hoping that many of the children who were separated from their parents are able to reunite with their parents, but it was inhumane, and we are going to continue the fight and to speak up around everything around immigration reform. So that is something that the campaign is passionate about.
Yeah, so shout out to all the work that's being done here for closing the, what's it called, Northwest Detention Center in Tacoma. All the activists doing work around that. We appreciate you. I also just learned, I knew that we had a facility that was holding children in Washington. I didn't realize it was the last one or like the last two left in the country, out in Cowlitz County. So what locally can we get real specific on Washington, how we're not, besides saying that we're a sanctuary city?
Right.
Until it's not convenient, then it's, sorry. Okay, moving on. Number 10, ensure all of the rights of Indigenous peoples, protect the rights and sovereignty of First Nations, Native Americans, Alaskan Natives, however they self-identify, including the free expression of religion, sacred lands and practices. I feel like land back just solves all of that, but this includes protecting Oak Flats and the sacred lands of the Apache people in Arizona. They're specifically named because the Pork People's Campaign has done specific actions with them. So I think that's why they're specifically named, but this is applicable to any tribe that we could help support. But to protect them from being destroyed and the water source contaminated by the extractive mining company, Resolution Copper, and all those companies. This devastation will prevent the Apache stronghold from exercising their right to the free expression of their religion and must be stopped immediately. Again, I don't even think we should have to get to the point of free expression of religion because it's their land back, like, period. But Bianca, do you have anything to add?
No, as an African American woman, I understand and feel you. I feel my Native brothers and sisters, so I stand in solidarity with you all. 11, enact fair taxes. Enact fair taxes on the wealthy, corporation, and Wall Street by repealing the 2017 tax law provisions that reduced the top marginal tax rate, slashed the corporate tax rate, and allowed for deductions on pass-through business incomes. Instituting a wealthy tax and implementing the other tax provision for the Poor People's Jubilee platform. I won't say much on that one because I have my own opinions about that. And I think that there are certain groups that should not have to pay taxes.
I would agree with that. For Washington specifically, we know we have an extremely regressive tax structure for the state without having income tax. Got like multiple billionaires who have their legacy businesses here. So yeah, we won't get into that today, but let's definitely get into that because
that could be a robust discussion for Monday.
if there's anybody who's passionate about that, like, let's make sure we hear from you. Or if you've got information already you'd like to share, we'd love to build off of the work you've already done because this is a problem. Number 12 is to use the power of executive orders. So using the power of executive orders to meet all the demands that we're going to formulate. This means reversing all executive orders from the previous administration that have exacerbated systemic racism, poverty, the denial of healthcare, unjust immigration enforcement, and climate devastation. It also means issuing new executive orders, especially around debt relief for those who cannot pay them, including medical debt, housing debt, water utilities, student debt, any debt for people, relieving municipal debt and bonds for local and state governments in fiscal crises. We know that stuff like that's what led to Flint, right? And waiving all interest payments. For this one, we actually have a poll because this is really nationally focused, right, with executive orders, but Jay Inslee has the ability to issue executive orders as well. So with our poll, we're curious, as we develop these Washington state specific demands, should we focus more of our energy towards those executive orders? Should we do more of legislators? Should we make sure there's an equal balance that we're asking for executive orders and policy change? We're just kind of curious where you all think we should focus that effort as we turn this list of priorities into actual demands that are specific to our state. let's see what you guys think off the top of your heads. Of course, we'll be talking more about the demands, and once they're drafted, if you're super passionate about this, we would love to have you working on that and helping us craft that. Very little people said, one person looks like said executive order as like the main focus. And then it's kind of a split of focusing mainly on legislative or doing both. So I think that'll be a fun conversation on Monday to figure out where we feel like we're going to be most effective, right? So I think that this is helpful and we will talk more. And then I know Bianca, you got to slide out. So let me get to you.
Yeah. Okay. So redirect the bloated Pentagon budget towards these priorities as matters of national security. These resources must be moved away from the war economy and put to use to fight COVID-19 and poverty, invest in healthcare, jobs, infrastructure, education, and more. This also includes ending the provision of military grade equipment and training to local and state law enforcement. We can get into a robust conversation with this all day. But I think it's a nice way of saying defund the police. Just being honest.
And again, that's a demand of ours to take money from this bloated military budget, which we can equate the police to the military locally, and put it towards the people. Like we've been saying that from day one of the campaign. So I'm sorry I cut you off, Bianca.
Oh no, you're good. I have a work presentation now that I have to do now. So I am going to slide out, but I look forward to hearing some feedback about the Q&A. So I'll connect with you later, Christina. But thank you all. We're looking forward to having this robust conversation on Monday. And let's really come up with a list of demands that we can go forth with and present to our governor. Monday is MLK Day, and that is a perfect time to have this kind of conversation. So thank you all. Thank you. I'm out.
Perfect. And then lastly, work with the Poor People's Campaign to establish a permanent presidential council to advocate for this bold agenda. This council will include directly impacted poor and low-income people, moral and religious leaders, economists, and other policy advocates. It will have direct access to the offices of the president and vice president to serve as advisors, analysts, change agents, and advocates to build public attention and support for these priorities and help oversee their implementation. So as a side note, we had a presidential candidates forum in 2019, and both Biden and Harris, were running at the time, spoke at that. And so they gave some bold promises. And I think that's how the national team, Reverend Barber and Liz Theo Harris, have been able to start to kind of build a relationship essentially with this new administration. So our way of putting pressure on them is to get them to commit to this council, and I'm very curious if they will. We shall see. So our question to you all for the final poll here is, do you think that it's worthwhile to build a similar council of impacted people, so people who are from here and been impacted by these issues that we're going to be saying, we've seen these issues, these are the demands we're presenting? Should we also include in that demand that we have a council of people who have that direct access, and we can define that further, right? Like, what does that mean? Regular meetings? What does that mean with, say, the offices of the governor or, but do you all think it's worthwhile putting effort and energy into building this kind of council that would have access to our politicians? There it is. And I know yes or no is kind of like, it's probably a maybe, it depends, is probably how you feel about it. So we can definitely get into those specifics on how you think we would go about creating that council. How do we hold people accountable, transparency, all of that. But it seems in largely favor of it's a yes. And we would definitely want to make sure it's diverse in a true sense. But let me be quiet and see what questions we have. I hope we can get to most of them in 13 minutes.
Okay. Hi, I'm Krista Irwin, and I'm one of the co-moderators. And I'm a white woman in my late 50s with curly hair and glasses. And behind me, you can see a lampshade and several windows. We have lots of questions, also some statements and comments too.
Love to hear those.
There are a number of organizations, including Black Lives Matter, who have made somewhat related demands to the state legislators for this session. How can everything be presented on a united front?
That's a great question. One thing that we didn't talk about at the beginning is that we're actually not an official organization. We use the metaphor that we're an organism, a movement, right? And we want to build off of the work that's already done. So Bianca actually, I think, sits on one of those coalitions for either the state or the county. I can't remember which one. So we are tapped in a little bit already, but part of our research for this and putting together the demands is looking at legislative priorities that have already been named by other groups. We've also got people doing some individual outreach to those groups. So if you know of anything, please send it our way. We absolutely do not want to replicate any work or come in like it was our idea when it's already been being said for months by somebody else. Definitely want to cite people as needed, or it might be as simple as saying, we demand that you support the agenda from this group if we agree with everything that's in that agenda. So that's kind of the ways we go about that.
Okay. Are the demands you've gone over on a website or somewhere where people can access them?
Yes. Is there a follow-up email to this event to all attendees from you all, or is that something that we do?
There is a follow-up email that will go out in about 24 hours.
Okay. I will make sure I get that link to these folks right after this call so that can be included. But honestly, if you just Google it right now, 14 policy priorities, Poor People's Campaign, it'll pop up. It's on the national website. And there's also a video from the session when they presented it. So if you'd prefer to listen and not read again, but there's also a downloadable PDF on that website.
Great. What about a state jobs program funded by federal money?
Ooh. That sounds great. We're going to download the chat and save all of this for our conversation on Monday. So why not, right? Like redistribute the funds. Makes sense to me personally.
Okay. Is there a reason you don't push for vote by mail nationwide?
I think that actually is one of our national demands. Is it vote by mail? I can't remember. The list of demands for nationals is so long. I think they use more broad language around accessible, but I like that we need to get that specific. So I'm going to take a second look at that. But when we're talking about these demands that we're developing for Washington, yeah, let's be very specific. And since we already have mail-in voting, like what are those other barriers here in our state, maybe for unsheltered people or poor people who are moving all the time and stuff like that? Like, what can we do to make it actually accessible?
Do you have a position on ranked choice voting? This person suggests that it could be hugely helpful to pull back from the current political polarization, but they're not sure if that's a focus of the Poor People's Campaign.
Christina Brennan is a big fan of ranked choice voting, and I don't know what the campaign's official stance is on that, but if there's a lot of support around that in amongst people in Washington and who comes and helps us gather this information, we can deviate from nationals always. So if we want ranked choice voting in Washington, let's support it. I know there's already people doing that work. I've signed a few petitions, so that's, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay. What is the current federal poverty wage?
I want to say, I don't know hourly, but I think it's something around $16,000 or $18,000 for a household. for annual.
At a family of 4 or 2?
So like a household is, I can't remember. I know I was helping somebody with some paperwork, and when they were having to do like a percentage off of the poverty line for one single person, I think it was like 12,000 and some change. That's why I was like, I don't know exactly where it is, but it's extremely low, like nonsensical, set way back when, and doesn't make any sense. But that's a great question. We definitely want to have our facts straight though when we do develop this document. So we will do our homework on that. Reverend Barbara always says, we don't want to be loud and wrong, or we won't be loud and wrong. So we will get that straight. Thank you.
What about childcare and early learning? Is that included in point 8?
Let me double check which one's 0.8. But yes, I know specifically in the moral budget, they like called out specific dollar amounts that should go to childcare, basically universal childcare, the way we would think about you have public school, publicly available childcare essentially. And then early learning, let's see, 0.8. Yes. Yeah, I would definitely say that. And this is definitely one of those areas where it's like, okay, it is important to specifically name that, because when we use these terms, public education, we need to get specific to where are the actual gaps right now, who is being left out, and then prioritizing them, right? Centering those most impacted. So thank you for that.
Okay. In terms of social welfare benefits, how can we move beyond means testing, census-based reporting for benefits? So many people don't have access to report and therefore get left out of receiving benefits. Does this campaign know of any current or future organizations work on universal benefits in Washington state?
I do not personally, so I hope if anybody is listening to that question on the call, and if you do, please share that, because that's absolutely important. And I'm sure somebody started the work, right? Like there's always somebody at least talking about it. So thank you for bringing that up. That's definitely something we need to look into more.
Has the Washington Poor People's Campaign advocated for HB 1054? And I'm sorry, I don't know exactly what that bill is. Do you?
I don't off the top of my head. Let's see. So 1054. We sign on to legislation very rarely, so I know we haven't officially signed on to it, but this page is not descriptive. Original bill. Okay.
And then it doesn't specify whether it's the 2019-2020 or if it's 2020-21.
Oh, okay. So I'm gonna just look, I'm looking at, I got 2019-2020 pulled up, and that one is for the permanent sales and use tax exemptions for the purchase of diapers.
That's what I saw, yeah.
Yeah, I would say that we would almost consider like a diaper a healthcare item. Like that should be free access, quite frankly. Like we would consider, when we say everybody has the right to live, and like we talk about different universal assistance, generally speaking, if it's something that you need to live, we basically believe that it should be some sort of public access to that resource. So diapers would definitely be included in that, like not just tax-free, but like you shouldn't have to pay for them if you feel like you can't.
There's a couple people asking about the conversation on Monday and how do they get the Zoom link and what time is it?
Yes. So I have a slide. It's going to be at 1 p.m. At 1 p.m. We have a Facebook event. If you're on Facebook, that's always a good way to get the little notification and everything. But there's a form that I will have in the follow-up. Link, it's basically a simple sign-up form. Give us your name and email address, and then we'll send you the Zoom link. So easy sign-up, and then we are just keeping it kind of private to that point. We don't have the sweet webinar function like we do with this account, but we'll have up to 100 people able to join that one.
Okay. And I got some more information on HB 1054, Washington Coalition for Police Accountability needs your help today so that neck restraints and chokeholds cannot be used against Washingtonians. Also bans tear gas, police dogs off leash, bans military equipment, no knock warrants, and restricts other tactics and equipment. So I think that's what 1054 is about.
Okay.
Would that be something the Poor People's Campaign would support?
Absolutely. I mean, let me not speak without reading it, but from that general description, absolutely. This part of when we talk about those 5 evils, when we talk about militarism and the war economy, our police force is overly militarized. Like, the reality is we don't need people policing us at the end of the day. So yes, we definitely, I just put that in our little team notes so that we can talk about that in our next meeting, because I didn't know that that was on the table. So thank you.
Okay. Very responsive. Has anyone addressed a living wage rather than a minimum wage so that it can vary from county to county depending on cost of living, housing, wages, and including healthcare costs?
From a national perspective, right, they're looking at that national average and they did the math on that, and it's literally like $22 and some change. When you look at the national average cost of living, that's that whole means testing part that folks are like, does that really do it? So we haven't supported anything specifically. I do think we'd want to get the state minimum raised quite a bit. But I do think it does make sense to go off a living wage. Nationals uses the phrase of a housing wage. So that's based off of the cost of living, right? So that would make sense to break it down by area. At the end of the day, this capitalism thing's just not working. So that's what needs to go. But I think it absolutely makes sense maybe as a way to transition, right? That we do it based off of cost of living. So that's something we can talk about on Monday, and like how to frame that.
Okay, here's one about student debt relief is important, but seems less of an issue for those in abject poverty because the opportunity to go to school is so difficult for those in poverty. Even getting a loan to have to pay back is difficult. What about those who were unable to go to school because of poverty? How do we benefit them and create an equitable environment where they are able to compete in the job market with their peers that were able to go to school?
Yes. So in addition to the debt relief, there's a demand for free public university. What does that do with folks who maybe they don't feel like they can go back to school? They've already started a family, they're working class. How can we get them? I know there's like one program here in Seattle, I think called Year Up, maybe. And so they do a year of, they kind of help, it's like an internship program almost. So it's getting jobs, training, and experience to get folks into that field of choice. And I don't remember which industries and job types that they focus on. But I think it's definitely some sort of combination of that. That's some things that we've at least talked about amongst our team is like, what are those, there's like gaps in some of the things that we're demanding, right? I think that's what this comment is pointing out, is that there's other groups that are kind of getting left out of that conversation. So I think we would definitely want to get more specific on how we can serve those. I'm also thinking of like folks who are formerly incarcerated and things like that. People who've been left out. I would love to hear more about how we can build a solution for them as well. So thank you.
We can take 2 more questions and we need to wrap up.
Okay. Aren't there already community places to get items like diapers for free, food banks, churches, Eastside Baby Corner? Are people not using those?
There absolutely are those things. We absolutely believe in mutual aid, and we believe that we, like the people that are working and living in this country, are the reason that all these big ass corporations have this wealth, and that's needs to be redistributed. And yes, we should take care of each other, and there are some resources, but if there was enough, then we wouldn't have 12,000 plus people without shelter just in our county alone, a county that was renamed after Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So, yes, those are nice things. And yes, if you're part of those things, please continue to care for your community. And we're saying that the onus shouldn't be on the community or the church, you know. Uh, they tried to run this game on us in the Congress of, well, shouldn't the church be doing more? And yes, some churches should absolutely be doing more. If Bianca was still here, she would step in and talk about that. But um, it's a both and always, anyways. First of all, everything's always both and. So we want to definitely continue those programs, care for each other, but the onus shouldn't be on poor people to scrap together and help other poor people when there's this mass amount of wealth that's generated off the backs of poor people. And then when we get into more dissecting that, indigenous people, Black people, like descendants of slaves or enslaved people, they shouldn't be having, like, it should be a given at this point. And the resources are there. We're not like asking for something that's not there. Sorry.
Let's try to squeeze in one more question. Europe has a lot of this that you mentioned, but they also have much higher taxes. How do you all recommend these important demands get funded?
If you like policy and getting into the nitty gritty, we Google moral budget from the Poor People's Campaign. First and foremost, we're like defund the military. So the moral budget actually talks about how we can cut our military budget in half and still have a larger military presence than the next 6 countries behind us. And that money would pay for all these social program demands that we're making around housing, education, healthcare, jobs, public internet, things like that. So that's one big thing. It's just literally shifting the money. It's the same thing we've heard from activists all year long of defund the police, invest in community, right? And free them all. So there's that piece, but then we gotta raise the taxes on these rich people that have all the money. Like billionaires grew their wealth through the pandemic, but all these other people are losing theirs or didn't have any in the first place, losing their jobs, losing their income. It's there, so it's just a matter of reallocation. And I'll leave it at that. But
Thank you so much, Christina. One of the things that we do after these workshops is ask people to fill out workshop evaluations. So I am going to put the links up here for the evaluation, and also for information about the Seattle MLK Coalition and information about the other workshops that are coming up. I did put the evaluation link in the chat, so you can copy it there. And finally, the last line is the email address for MLK workshops, and you are welcome to contact us if you have questions. We can pass on any questions to the presenters. So this concludes our workshop for this hour. Thank you so much for attending. And we'll have a little more information for you in the email that will arrive in your inbox in about 24 hours. Thank you so much. This concludes our workshop.